name is Bogdan, and today I wanted to share a little bit about my journey as a software engineer through a couple of different environments, in particular research, corporate, and startup life. So before we begin, a little bit of an agenda. We're going to go over a bird's eye view of my own career path and then use that as background for a conversation about the differences between maybe academic life, corporate life, and startup life. And then at the end, save some time for some key takeaways and, of course, Q&A. And before we begin, I'd like to say that I believe probably a good audience for this would be folks that are still in school, maybe, or potentially early career individuals. Straight into it. Short blurb about my own career path. I did my undergrad in an international school in Germany. This was a very research focused institution, and then I followed up with a Master of Philosophy in Cambridge University in the UK. In the meantime, I did a bunch of Facebook internships that ultimately led to me joining Facebook full time for about 2 years. And afterwards, maybe for the past three and a half years, I've been in two startups, and I'm currently with Yugabyte. So moving into academic life. So even before college, I was actually a math kid, like international Olympiads and everything. So by the time I actually got to college, this made things a little bit murky because I felt that there were a lot of different choices that I could be making. But ultimately, I ended up landing in computer science because I felt that this would be a direct application of my problem-solving interests and abilities. And this also helped that math as a fundamental discipline is theoretical, and both my bachelor's was heavily research focused, and ultimately my master's is a master in philosophy, which is sort of like PhD year zero. So let's jump straight into the good, bad, and ugly of these experiences. So as far as research was concerned, I joined the research group maybe like half a year into my bachelor studies. The one primary thing that I appreciated was the focus on actually solving a particular problem. So as part of, as I mentioned, my math background, I really appreciated the idea of doubling down on a particular topic and being able to focus and to actually get to the core of said problem. Now, this was something that I loosely expected going in, but there were other things which I discovered along the way that I also realized I enjoyed. So two of those being independence and time flexibility, which loosely translate into how you end up doing your work and when you end up doing your work. So a fun example of maybe an extreme example of how much flexibility this can entail is as I was finishing my master's study, I needed to write up my thesis with regards to the topic, and that was to be maybe a 70-page publication. I had 0 pages with 10 days to the deadline. So my soon-to-be wife and I ended up going to a friend's graduation in Germany, then driving out, getting married, flying back in, and I had maybe 6-7 days with 0 pages and got everything done by the end. Now, again, that might be a little bit extreme. So switching to the bad, it also highlights, for example, one of the problems, which is fundamentally you don't have a clear set of deadlines or a clear set of time pressuring events, which would push you towards definitely delivering against this milestone. So this can be a positive in the sense that you have the flexibility to do it whenever you want, but it can also be a negative that it doesn't force you to not procrastinate, for example. A different aspect that might be labelable as bad would be related to impact. Now, objectively, and keep in mind, I didn't actually do a PhD, so I can't talk to like significantly further down the line, but objectively, research is supposed to be about pushing the envelope of science or of a particular topic. However, at a lower level of, let's say, a bachelor's or a master's, I felt that the overall impact that I would personally be able to deliver to that end goal was significantly limited. It was just a very small piece of what was fundamentally the bigger problem. And lastly, I realized as part of my my endeavor that I definitely enjoyed working with people. And while technically a research group is comprised of various people that are supposed to be working together towards solving a bigger problem, in actuality, what ended up happening is that everyone really gets their particular slices of the problem, and more often than not, we end up working relatively independently towards solving that problem. Now, for some of the uglier and not so easily easily discoverable aspects. So I was quite fortunate in the aspect of finding a good professor that was supportive, that had interesting research that I could do, that had a relatively sizable research group of good like-minded individuals, and so on and so forth. But a bunch of my friends, as part of the mandatory research we would be signing up for, weren't necessarily so fortunate. So your mileage may actually vary. Now, a different aspect of this is depth. Fundamentally, research is supposed to be about depth. You are supposed to get to the bottom of a interesting problem and try to actually push it past wherever it was in the field beforehand. But that particular focus on depth can also be a detriment to you individually if, worst case scenario, you realize a couple of years down the line that the actual focus area that you've doubled down on isn't actually something you're still excited about, or once you've reached that level, it's no longer something that you think is valuable to you. And the last one, and I didn't really know how to label this, is what I mentioned as totalitarian nature. So fundamentally, all institutions are to some extent hierarchical. You will see this in startups, you will see this in big corporations, you will see this in academia. But in particular, I definitely felt that the academic life is a very top-down approach where your professor fundamentally gets funding for your group and decides the topic of research for the entire group. Then the postdocs underneath carve that out into individual topics that they will each be interested in pursuing further, and then the PhDs take some pieces of that, and so on and so forth, until you as a bachelor student, let's say, or as a master student, will take some amount of work as part of that. Quick foray now into corporate life. As part of my my research background in undergrad, my institution was also relatively friendly towards diversity. And what I mean by that is that they actually mandated that all students need to do at least one internship in order to graduate, which would essentially be forcing us to contrast the research experience they would be getting as part of the 3 years bachelor's to an actual potentially industry experience. So as part of this, I ended up doing actually 3 internships, one with Ubisoft in my first year, and then 2 follow-up internships with Facebook, which ultimately also led to my full-time offer. Now, the interesting part here is that when I joined my undergrad, fundamentally, I knew that there's a lot of things I don't know. So I looked at it as an experience to enhance my overall knowledge, my overall skill set, and basically just take it as a learning opportunity. What I didn't necessarily realize is just how important awareness and peer groups actually were. And what I mean by that is, as a simple example, I only ended up even applying to Facebook as a place to do an internship and ultimately to do work because I became aware of this. And I became aware of this by virtue of having had a bunch of friends during my high school time doing Olympiads that ended up fanning out across the globe in different settings, one of which had done an internship in Facebook the previous year and convinced me that it was a great opportunity. So what I want to highlight as a takeaway from here is that, again, people really do matter, and it's important to be surrounded by people who will be able to either positively push you forward or help you be the better person that you should be. So now let's go a little bit over my experience in Facebook, but in general my experience with the corporate setting. And of course, let's start with the good. So I believe that there is a bunch of fundamental aspects of being in a corporate entity that are positive towards your development as a software engineer, or overall as a member of the technical community at large. The first part of this is related to core engineering aspects. Now, what I mean by this? So this could be everything from before you even write your first line of code. How do you gather all the requirements for your task? How do you understand why this task is particularly important? What are the priorities for this? How it relates to overall what your company is trying to accomplish? Then to actually writing the code, getting your code reviewed, making sure that the design beforehand was properly vetted, making sure that this code is properly built and tested, making sure that this code is actually released to your customers. How do you actually know that your customers are using it? How do you know that they're using it in the correct way? How do you ensure that when problems happen in, let's say, a production environment, you know what to do, or someone in the company knows what to do? So all of these I label as core engineering. Some of these are related to point number 2, which is good processes. Now, because some processes fundamentally are related to the engineering or to overall the development aspect of engineering. However, there are plenty of processes which are not focused on engineering. So for example, things like mentorship, getting a good hiring program, getting a good internship program, getting a good interview program, setting up a good career conversation or overall career progression program in management, and so on and so forth. All of these are examples of things that if the company has evolved in a good direction and continuously improving, you will find good examples of such processes throughout the company, and you'll be able to absorb some of these and figure out when you actually appreciate the outcome of what they're able to provide. And lastly, and this might be a theme throughout the entire conversation, impact. So one of the problems I had with doing research was that I felt that even in the happiest of paths, the impact of the work that I was doing would be quantifiable far, far later and after far more effort. By contrast, let's say working in Facebook at 1 billion users, anything that you write the code for and you ship as a feature ultimately gets deployed to, say, 1 billion people. So it is relatively easy to see the tangible impact of your work. Some of the bad aspects of it, and I'll start explicitly with impact because it's a double-edged sword. The company ends up setting up OKRs, objectives and key results, and I think I butchered the slide. So fundamentally what this means is the company has a set of goals that it's trying to push for, let's say, for the next half a year. Similarly, your particular umbrella organization or team will have some contribution to these OKRs. And you as an individual should have some contribution towards them as well. But it also means that your impact is measured towards those OKRs. So if you're not delivering against those, chances are you're not necessarily having as much impact as you should. Similarly, processes can be extremely useful for streamlining work in the organization, but they can also work against you. One example of this being, let's say, promotability. There are certain companies, definitely in the Valley here, who have processes such as you are not even eligible for promotion if you have not been with the company for 2 cycles of reviews. That means essentially 1 full year of their review cycle, which if you are an ambitious straight out of a university student and you would like to be involved in a lot of work and try to see how you can grow as fast as you possibly can, this can potentially stifle you. And lastly, again, coming from a research background, there is this potential caveat of everything feeling already solved, or feeling maybe that instead of you actually figuring out solutions to problems, you're more just implementing a pre-described solution to a problem in this particular space. And now some of the uglier parts, and I definitely need to give examples for all of these. So first off, and one of my biggest pet peeves is information asymmetry. The company fundamentally is geared towards not having you know everything about everything that happens. What do I mean by this? So the clearest example of this was my first promotion. I distinctly remember getting into a room, having a conversation with my manager, and she points out the actual packet that I got and the 20-something percent raise, and little clueless me being surprised whether, is 20% good, is 20% bad, is it average, is it above average, how am I doing? At which point she naturally laughs because A, she probably understands that I don't really have a good handle on this, but also in her words, of course this is great, 20% is huge. Only to contrast this, fast forwarding like 2 years when I got the next set of offers from companies, and the package that I was getting was essentially about 2 times larger than what I currently had at that time. So it's important to understand that not everything that you know will actually reflect the complete reality. Second part is, people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. That's not just a saying. It's actually even more valid in bigger corporations. I had 4 managers by the time I hit 1 year in Facebook, and none of that was anything that I could actually impact or influence. And lastly, one note about HR. From my experience, HR's primary function is to actually protect the company rather than protect the individual. So for example, in Facebook, I had to deal with this entity called HRBPs, which are supposed to be third-party entities that can mediate between you and, let's say, your manager in case you have want to have a difficult conversations. I want to say that less than 2 days later, my manager's manager pulled me in a room to talk about explicitly the conversation I wanted to bring forth, which kind of defeats the third-party mediation aspect. And lastly, startup life. After all this experience, why would I want to consider a startup? Why do I think that this can provide something fundamentally different. So the reason I was chasing something different was, after all of my experience to date, I realized some things that I enjoyed and some things that I didn't enjoy. I realized I wanted more freedom, more flexibility, but also more ownership over what I was actually building, what I was actually being able to bring forth into the world. I also wanted significantly less what I refer to as curve fitting. You will frequently hear this in bigger corporations, the idea of a bell curve, and that fundamentally employees need to be distributed across a certain bell curve, and there will be a bulk of the people that are like pretty much in the middle, let's say meeting expectations, or like slightly exceeding, or slightly not hitting expectations, and then some parts at the outskirts. And lastly, I wanted to understand better, how do you actually manage to build a successful company or a successful business fundamentally? And of course, the first thing that I hit was imposter syndrome. So, like, everyone actually hits this. It's perfectly natural. I learned along the way, by hitting my head first against this, that it is natural. My first worry out of leaving Facebook was, oh my God, this was a great company, and I've managed to actually leave. What will I do? How will my life from now actually look like? Naturally, that wasn't the problem, and I learned to get past this. And this brings me to point number 3, which I have to reiterate. People really do matter. The first experience I got right out of Facebook was actually a startup called UCAR, and I had a bunch of different offers that I was considering, and I chose this company primarily because one of the people that was starting the team in Silicon Valley was actually one of the people I had directly worked with in Facebook. And I was really excited because my interactions with my friend Jan had been really positive, our work had been really great, and so on and so forth. So I was very excited to jump on board. That didn't necessarily work out for various other reasons, as startups and experience also do. And that led me to startup number 2, which is Yugabyte, where I currently am. And in this particular case, the 3 founders that approached me were actually 3 folks that I had been working with during my Facebook internship during my first Facebook internship in the messaging team. So again, having good connections with people and appreciating the work that you do together and leaving a positive impact both ways is really positive. I can't stress that hard enough. So let me get a little bit into some more details about this. Now, some of the good parts of startup life so far, 3 and something years in. Fundamentally, I think it has the potential to give you a breadth of experience that is bigger than most other contexts in which you would be able to work with. The second and third point are actually pretty tied together, but by virtue of building something essentially from nothing, you learn a lot about how to even build a business and how to even build a team. Both of those have to work very well in tandem, because my personal understanding and feeling is that businesses fundamentally are represented by the teams that power them. So, take that as it may. Some of the bads of the experience. So all the things I mentioned under good as my experience in corporate life, so both processes, let's say, and core engineering, many of those chances are will not even exist. Depending on how early you join in a startup's journey, you likely won't have automated tooling for building and testing. You likely might not even have folks that are particularly aware of what a good process should look like for recruiting or for overall managing the career development of your employees, and so on and so forth. Second category of items is what I label as known unknowns, and you'll see in a second why I refer to them this way. So there are things that when you start up and when you start on this journey, you will have to solve. There are problems that you will end up hitting. You know that they will be there. You just need to find a way to execute and either work around them, work through them, and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, you know that they will be coming. Now, the third aspect, though, is again related to impact. So remember when I mentioned that in Facebook, I felt that overall, you already have a huge market of, say, 1 billion, 2 billion people, that every individual feature that you contribute to will end up affecting the lives of said users. However, the contribution that you have towards that feature, let's say, is ultimately a relatively small percentage of the overall impact that is being delivered. Contrasting to, for example, let's say a startup experience where maybe you only have one customer. Fundamentally, you might be, 30% or 50% of the overall well-being of that one customer. You get a huge chunk of a potentially very, very small pie. with the hope that in the end it will become a big pie that you had a huge stake in building up front. But now some of the ugly parts of the experience. So remember how I mentioned known unknowns. Now there's also what I like to refer as unknown unknowns, and these are things that you don't necessarily even see coming or even think about before they actually happen. And these can be, for example, employees leaving for various personal aspects that you can't control, or market shifts where fundamentally new competitors crop up that just have a better product that you do, or cloud providers like Amazon decide that actually what you're doing is something that we could subsume ourselves and just deliver as a product, and overnight your company cannot even possibly exist anymore. The second part is about growth. So in a corporate setting, I feel that there's a lot of processes already established in order to manage your growth, and to have a manager, you at least have a good possibility of having a manager that cares about your personal development, your career direction, and so on and so forth. In a startup, a lot of the overall mindshare can sometimes go towards building a product, or worst case towards surviving as a company. So you might end up feeling that less time might be going towards your personal development, or in a best case, you end up being responsible for driving this and ensuring that you actually know what you need and get what you need. And the last part is what you'll often hear referred to as the emotional roller coaster. As I mentioned, as part of the unknown unknowns, there are going to be things that happen that are not in your control. There are going to be weeks when you feel that your company is doing great. You just signed 3 customers and the money is flowing in and it seems like your market strategy is actually going well. And there are going to be weeks when, contracts actually go bust. You've been working for 2 years on signing a customer and they decide to call quits at the very last minute, and so on and so forth. So, take this with a grain of salt. Every experience will be different, and every week might end up being different. So reaching the end, I wanted to actually have one slide where I can highlight some of the key takeaways, and then we can move on to Q&A. But essentially, I split this into 3 different categories of at least my personal experience and what I ended up valuing as part of this entire journey. So I split these into breadth, process, and people. I think that as part of my experience, I realized that I enjoy breadth of experiences as well as breadth of technical direction. But I also realized that it's fundamentally a choice. You, as an individual, need to figure out for yourself if you enjoy, let's say, a breadth of technical exploration into getting deeper and deeper into a particular topic, as opposed to breadth and understanding more of the context and more of the peripherals and so on and so forth. The other part is that early experimentation is actually a relatively cheap thing to do. If you're still in college, do internships. Do as many internships as you have access to, and ideally do internships in different companies, even more so in different sides of the industry. Lastly, if you're already in a corporate setting, the company can sometimes already act as a safety net for your exploration. Change teams, figure out how to actually do different types of work as part of your current team. Worst case scenario, change companies. If you're relatively early on, this can actually be relatively streamlined and not have a particularly high impact on your career, which hopefully will be relatively long and positive. Second part is about processes. So I feel that there is a lot to learn from an environment where things actually work. So in particular, I mentioned the corporate setting. Assuming that setting is properly ramped up and so on and so forth, you will be able to see a lot of good practices. And this is just overall positive for you as an individual, for you as an engineer, or you as a technical, as a worker in tech overall. Similarly, I think that software overall, and good software ideally, is about much more than just the code. The code is just the means for you to actually get the thing to exist. But things like, how do you ensure upfront that you're not writing needless code? How do you ensure that your code gets turned into a meaningful artifact that people can actually use, and so on and so forth. Finally, I believe there's a right time and place for everything, and this is something I'm learning more and more by virtue of being in a startup. Process can be good. Too much process too early on can be bad. The wrong type of process can be horrible, and so on and so forth. Different companies at different stages will require different things. And lastly, people. And this is the part that I personally enjoy, have ended up enjoying most. So first things first, be nice. It's I can't really stress this particularly too much, but it's incredible how much you can, how much of a positive impact you can have in other people's lives and they can have in yours if you're just overall nice to your fellow coworkers or overall human beings. And as part of that, zooming in, your peer group in particular will end up being immensely influential, assuming that you end up surrounding yourself with good people who end up fundamentally going on different paths. The world is relatively small, in particular in tech, so the chances of you meeting the same people again in the future are pretty high. And lastly, I mentioned this earlier during startups, but I fundamentally believe that a company is not really the entity as much as the people that actually form the company. So hiring the right people, making sure that you have a team that works well together, making sure that like the overall culture that you establish in a company is positive and positively reinforcing is something like potentially obvious, but of immense impact. That's pretty much it for me. So I'd like to actually open this up for Q&A. I think there's a bunch of chat messages I might get to.
Yeah.
Up to you folks.
Yeah, I just think it's just amazingly refreshing how you shared different concepts and just also different working culture and environments and the thought process along the longevity of it. The question I have for you is, along your way, was it something that you realized on your own, or did you get some mentorship or get some insight or peer mentorship? Like, because I feel like some of the things you're talking about, I don't know if someone will just automatically know it, right?
Yeah, that's definitely a great great question, and this almost brings me back to what I was saying in college. I feel like a lot of it has to do with even awareness. Like, there's so many things that you don't know that you don't know that it's actually incredible. So to your point, yes, great mentors are really useful. In some particular aspects, I would say that having a great manager is actually of supreme importance. So if you can find yourself in a company with a dedicated manager that meaningfully wants to help and has the ability to help, I would almost argue that is fundamentally even more important than explicitly the type of work that you're doing, because at the very least they're going to be able to guide you towards learning more about other things that maybe you might be enjoying more, and so on and so forth. I also do believe that a lot of it is on yourself though as well, just to reach out or to find different to explore and figure out, okay, if I'm not enjoying this, is there something else I could be enjoying, and so on and so forth. But then again, some of these might just require having the privilege to even be able to do so. If you're stuck in a particular context and you end up realizing, if you're in a PhD and you end up realizing 2 to 3 years in that actually you're not enjoying this, you might be very validly considering, is it worth continuing, or is it worth cutting my losses and just switching to a context that I would be enjoying more? I can't answer that for you, but it's an example.
All right, thank you. Anyone else has a question?
I was just going to comment that those are really great points, very, very raw experience, coming from your student life to corporate life to startup life. I think your energy is really great to share with everybody, and hopefully somebody will ask you to be a mentor for them.
Thank you. That's actually, as part of going through this experience, I've actually realized more and more how much I actually enjoy that for myself. And I've been very fortunate to be able to mentor quite a couple of interns along the way, and I'm slowly switching into a technical leadership position at my current company. So that's a pretty on point time-wise observation. Thanks a lot.
When did you know it was time to leave Facebook, right? Like, like how do you know that, right? Like,
yeah, I think some parts of, that's that's a great question. I think some parts of that are just cups overflowing. I like to use this metaphor of both for positive and for negative things, of us having various cups of things that matter, and those cups slowly filling in until the point that they burst. This works for positive things like, I don't know, relationships and realizing you end up loving someone, to negative things of, a job becoming frustrating and realizing you need to leave. In my point, I think by the time I hit my 4th manager, I knew that I'm getting close to the edge of like, this is not going to work out for me. But I think a bigger problem was also just my experience going through this as an intern, let's say 4 years before, was something really positive that I was looking forward to continuing as a full-time. But the company overall had changed by that time. And unfortunately, I wasn't necessarily, my perception had not necessarily changed with it. So I was kind of blindsided by some of the changes. So I think between the managerial shift and me finally waking up and realizing that this environment is not the environment that I joined 4 years ago, where I would have that level of flexibility and openness and ownership and so on and so forth, pretty much tipped the scale in the end. But it is a hard decision to make. If you're facing something similar, I wouldn't envy you.
I appreciate it. All right, we're gonna go on to the next speaker, but we'll talk because I'm doing a lot of stuff around male allyship and just different conversation.
I think that's hugely important. If anyone does want to actually reach out to me and didn't want to reach out throughout the Q&A, I'm more than happy with Jane sharing either my LinkedIn or my Twitter or even my email, and I'd be more than happy to sync up afterwards.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
This is our second speaker today, Poonam. So Poonam, please welcome and give us your insight about the software engineering topic.
So continuing in our series of technology careers, today we will be looking into the roles and responsibilities and the activities of a software engineer. While the term software engineer covers a broad spectrum of technology careers, the focus for today will be on software development in a product-based company. Engineering from PSIT Bangalore, and as a part of my final year internship, I interned with Hewlett Packard. I got absorbed into the same team and worked there for 2 years. Here I was working as a part of the networking team, which provided the networking stack, which implemented the networking stack protocols, which are shipped as a part of the HPUX server. These include the DHCP, TFTP, NTP, SendMail, all these, which provide the basic connectivity on the server side. Those were the days when the mobiles were still not connected to the internet, and we were using the IPv4 addresses. The IPv6 protocol was finalized, and in this team I also worked on the implementation of the DHCP-v6 protocol, which was trying to assign more and more addresses as we were running out of address spaces. From HP, I then moved to Cadence Design Systems, which is an electronic design automation company, which provides a platform, an entire ecosystem for chip designers to be able to design chips. It provides end-to-end solution so that a chip designer is able to edit and simulate his designs, do the verification, and be able to edit his designs again so that he can see the results prior to actually sending out his chip to the foundry to be able ready for manufacturing. From Cadence, I then moved to Ion Trading. Ion Trading is again a product company which provides a platform for trading. It provides trading solutions for banks and trading houses to connect to the fixed income markets in US and Europe. There, I worked on implementing the market APIs of different markets like the TradeWeb, Bloomberg, DealerWeb, for which we had to develop gateways so that the customers could connect to these markets through these gateways. In addition to implementing the gateways, I also worked on providing the core infrastructure libraries, which would translate the market data to the Ion platform so that all the downstream components are able to process the market data in material, not depending on the exact market that it is being received from. From Ion, after spending 6 years at Iron, I moved back to Cadence, and right now I'm working with Cadence as a principal software engineer, working on the layout editor development as a part of the custom IC team. Apart from being a developer, I have been associated with the Make a Child Smile initiative, which Cadence has, and also I take part in mentoring undergraduate students, again, which is a Cadence scholarship program. We'll now have a look at a typical day of a software engineer. A major part of software development is to write code. In a product development company, mostly you are associated with a set of tools in a product suite. And since it is a legacy of tools that you're working on, the programming language more or less remains the same unless you change your team or your product is being re-engineered and being returned in a different language. You may be working on C, C++, Java, some such language, or for the backend, and another different language for your GUI, which could involve Qt or Java Swing or any other language that is proprietary to your organization. In addition, you may also be spending time writing scripts for automation of some tasks that you do on a daily basis. So when you write code, you first of all need to be able to spec out the feature that you are going to write the code for. This happens during the design phase, where you are figuring out the details of what is it that you want to code. This happens in close collaboration with the product engineer, who acts as a liaison between the customer and the product development team. He is able to translate the customer's requirements so that the development team is able to understand, and the development team will now work on designing it. Say you are working on a gateway which provides ability to add orders. And now the orders, typically when you add an order, say you are adding it for a size of 100, and there is already a resting order on the other side for size 50. So when your order goes to the market, it will hit the other side for 50, and the rest of the order gets cancelled. But now there is a new requirement which wants your gateway to be able to send orders to the market which are all or none, which means that when the customer places an order of 100, he either trades it for a size of 100 or it is 0. So now when you have this new enhancement, which the product engineer has told you, you need to define the steps that are to be done to be able to provide this enhancement to the customer. Of course, this means that your gateway should be able to send that kind of orders, that kind of messages which the market is able to understand. The market APIs need to be modified in such a way. Apart from this, you would have to add a new option in your GUI form. So you will decide what is the menu in which you want to add this option, what will you name this option, the order type. Then you would also spec out on what will be the default value. Will the user need to change this every time he's placing an order, or is it defined at the beginning of a session and it stays till the end of the session? So these are the details which you will work out during the design phase. Or say you are adding a new field in an already existing form, which is an integer field. So you need to define what would be the range of this field, and how is your product supposed to behave if the user enters something out of this range. Should there be an error message? Should there be a pop-up, or should it just be shown on the terminal? And what is the corrective action for the user? Or will your product automatically wrap the value to a default value inside of the range? These are the details that you need to spec out during the design phase. In addition to these, you would also do prototyping, which would give you clarity on what would be the new classes that you need to define, what are the entities, what would be the interfacing between them, if there is any, what would be the new variables that you would need to add to the existing classes in your code. These are the kind of details that you would need to spec out during the design phase. Once you write the code, you would need to test that the code that you have written indeed does what it is supposed to do. With the test-driven development as a part of agile development these days, you would be developing your test alongside your code, or you may be following the waterfall model, in which case you would finish your implementation, finish writing the code, and then go on developing the unit test cases to test every part of the feature that you have just developed. Most of the organizations require the software developer to write these unit test cases and also to automate them, so that when you are releasing future versions of your product, the regression test suite can be done automatically on the newer versions that are being released. So that you're sure that the new changes you have made are not breaking any of the existing features. Mostly the integration testing, performance testing, black box testing are performed by a separate product validation team in most organizations. So the scope of the software developer would be more on white box testing and unit test cases. After having done with the testing, you would be required to document the feature so that the end user is able to use your feature and also get to know what it exactly does. At this point of time, it is required that you are able to explain your feature in more from the user perspective rather than from the technical development point of view. Apart from these, it is required that you review code which is written by other team members. What this means is there is another team member who is working on a completely different feature. So it is required that you read his code, understand what it does, be able to verify that the code indeed does what specifications say, to verify that no cases have been left out. You also verify and think whether the code has been written efficiently, if there are any loops which can be shortened, if you see any performance overheads which you think can be done away with, or you see some part of the code which is already available somewhere else, and some code which you think is a duplicate and can be used from another part of your code. So these are the kind of inputs you provide when you review the code written by somebody else in your team. Apart from these things, you would also be involved in giving a demo of the features that you have developed. It could be either to the product engineer or the product validation team, or maybe the documentation team, sometimes to the customers, and also to the partner team, or even within your own team. So not only would you be required to work on maybe new enhancements and new features, you would also be required to maintain the product, because the product has been in the market and it is already being used by the customers. We may be getting incoming bugs or crashes which were not caught during the testing phase that happened before the release. What this means is, you would have to replicate the customer scenario, try to bring your product to perform the same way as it is happening on the customer side, find out the root cause of this and fix the issue, and also make sure that you fix any similar scenarios that are there maybe on parallel products. Once this is done, some of the organizations require that you release the kit directly on the release site, build the tarball and put it on the required location. And some of the companies have a separate configuration management team or release team which will take care of building the targets and releasing the tarballs for the customers to pick up. This is This varies from organization to organization. Having seen what a software developer does on a daily basis, we will just have a look at what are the skills required apart from the technical skills of object-oriented knowledge or the data structures, algorithms, and the programming language that you are working on. It is required that you have an analytical mindset because you need to think of the different scenarios in which your product is going to work. Not only do you want your product to work in the cases that it is supposed to work, but you should also make it foolproof so that it is able to error out in the cases of where it gets an unexpected input. You need to be thorough and detail oriented, and also think from the user perspective. Put yourself in the user's place and think what are the various scenarios in which you would want to use the product. And as you have seen, it is required that you switch context from writing code to coming up with test cases, to coming up with design specification, to doing the demo to the customers or to your technical publications team, to replicating crashes. So you need to be able to do context switching between these different areas. And also, it may happen that you are at any given point of time writing code for multiple features. So you are working on 3 projects on the same software product, which would again mean that you would be required to switch context in the feature that you are currently working on. As we have seen, it requires you to be able to collaborate with the different cross-functional teams like validation and build management, technical publications, product engineer, and again, this would mean that you need to be strong at communication and be able to present your work to them. In addition, the software developer, although this role looks like it is standalone role, it is not, because you have to collaborate not only with people outside of the team, but within the team too. You are sharing knowledge during code reviews or during demos. There are advancements happening in the technology every day. Your programming languages are evolving and new constructs are being added. You should be ready to learn and expand your horizon. So in addition to, after having looked into the skills that are required and the roles and responsibilities, we will have a look at the career path as one progresses in this role. You have a choice to either stick to the technical side, you advance to be a software architect, or you can move into management role, moving on towards becoming a director and a VP. When you are on the technical side, you would be responsible for the product that you own, its architecture, performance, benchmarking, and defining what the roadmap would look like. You would be required to re-engineer your product, or you would be required to make changes in your product depending on what are the requirements from the customers. So you would be more working on the technical side of the product that you own. Whereas on the management role, would be required to manage people in addition to driving the business of the product. So when you are on the management ladder, you would also be closely talking to the customers, also have a close watch on the competitors to be able to define the business objectives and align your product with the business line and expand your business so that you are able to drive the business. Of course, you would keep a track of the technology changes that are happening in the product, but you would not be contributing to it technically in terms of writing code. So this covers what I wanted to share today for software engineers role. Thank you.
Great, thank you.